All right. Hi. I am Linda Deir, and last Saturday I read to you from chapter 25 of my true life story, Guided. Her spirit guide angels were her best friends and life coaches. I read about the wedding. The day of our wedding arrived. We woke up to find it was indeed a perfect, warm spring day, just like our guides told us it would be 6 months earlier. By the way, we got married on January 1st of 2005. So the likelihood of that was very small. It was like the parting of the seas in the Bible. This one day opened and it was magical. Ray was beginning to see how these predictions played out against all logic. Today, I will be reading to you from chapter 26 of Guided. Ray, the volume's working, right? Over here? Okay. A lifetime of family secrets unravels. So sit back and relax as I tell the story about how, despite the dysfunction, my spirit guides took me on one journey after another that led me to a greater understanding of myself. And this is Guided. This is my flagship book, my award-winning autobiography, available on Amazon, iTunes, and Audible. The book is published in paperback Kindle and audiobook format, and I read the book. All right, let's move this out of the way a little bit. And we are getting to look at this. We're getting near the end of Guided. We are on chapter 26 today. There's a total of 28 chapters in Guided. So after this, we've got 2 more weeks, Saturdays, of reading from Guided as it gets more and more and more and more interesting. Okay, chapter 26, a lifetime of family secrets unravels. We really enjoyed our 3-day visit with Uncle Charlie in Texas, with his sister and her husband. Ray and Uncle Charlie just loved each other. We were both sad to leave because we knew we wouldn't be seeing him again, at least in this lifetime. With what we had learned from Uncle Charlie, I had more questions than answers about my family's history. Ray and I thought about the fact that we thought we should investigate this when we got back to Sedona. Upon our return home, Ray and I started getting caught up on the usual details after settling back in from a trip. The Sedona wildfires were contained, and the air quality was back to normal, and our home was not affected, just like our guides told us before we left. Then we got a phone call from my daughter, Cindy. She told us that my mom, was diagnosed with lung cancer and had about 6 months to live. She told us that she had had a recent falling out with my mom and she wouldn't allow her to visit. When I asked Cindy why, she said she didn't know. We asked her to keep us informed. Knowing that my mom had a short time to live, I went right to work on investigating my family history. It was no longer a should do situation. It was now a have to do urgent matter. I just didn't know how it would be blah, blah, blah. I just didn't know how revealing it would become. Okay. Ray and I started looking for my mom and dad's marriage license. But no matter how deep we dug, none was to be found. Then we got on the internet and researched my mom's side of the family. There wasn't much there. We had found a lot more on my dad's side because I had more information to go on. Then I found an internet phone directory site for Erie, Pennsylvania, where my mom was born. She had a very common last name, so trying to get to her actual relatives was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Starting at staring at 9 pages of people with the same last name as my mom, I became discouraged. I didn't even know where to start. So I enlisted the help of my guides. By using the same dowsing technique we use to channel them, they pinpointed the key relative who was instrumental in uncovering the mystery. The first person they picked was a bullseye. They had led me to a close relative who knew my mom and the rest of her close family. These relatives were shocked when I introduced myself as my mother's daughter. They told me that everyone thought my mom was dead. I told them that she always told us kids that they were all dead. It was the strangest call ever. I spoke to this person a few times as we compared notes from the past. They recalled what a difficult situation my mom had been in as a child and felt bad, even a little guilty for not having done more to help her. They said she didn't have a fair chance and that she didn't get the right help. They also knew my mom's brother, Bobby. My mom had told us that Bobby had been a Marine and was killed in World War II. It turns out that he was actually alive and well, living in Ohio. I told them that mom had been diagnosed with lung cancer and only had about 6 months to live. I asked them if they would contact her brother to pave the way, so it wouldn't come as much of a shock to him when we made contact with each other. They understood my concern and agreed to help. From that moment on, everything just took on a life of its own. I sensed that a great healing was about to take place. When the relatives called Uncle Bob, he couldn't believe what they told him. But as a result of that call, he decided to contact me anyway. It all had been such a shock to him that he told me he was going to put me through a series of tests to see if I was for real. I told him I was okay with that. I added that my mom had kept her past a secret, and I was only beginning to uncover the truth myself, so I didn't know how well I would do with his questions. When I said that, he recognized that as something my mom would do. That started us off pretty well, and he ended up asking only a few questions because he could see that I was indeed genuine. We compared notes about mom's life as much as we could in that first phone call conversation. He told me that he had been searching for his sister for 59 years. In future conversations, he told me that they also had a younger sister. I asked him about her because mom had never mentioned a sister. He said her name was Brenda and that she was still alive but not in good health. Mom was the middle child, Uncle Bob was the oldest, and Brenda was the youngest. On another call, he told me that he had made arrangements to fly to Sacramento to visit my mom in September. He was very emotional, both upset and happy at the same time. He was a very level-headed guy, an ex-Marine who liked structure and detested not knowing what happened. He told me he wanted to meet with my mom first. Then he would like to meet Ray and me later, back in Erie. This trip to Pennsylvania would fit perfectly with the visit to Ray's mom in Ohio that we had been instructed to make from a channeling session with Ray's guides in the previous July. See how this all ties together? It's amazing how the guidance points you in the right direction, although you can't see what's going on or what's coming down the pike in the moment that happens. Uncle Bob had everything arranged perfectly, and we agreed to cooperate with his plan. I was just beginning to see the magnitude of confusion and open wounds that Mom had left behind 59 years ago. Lesson: no matter how much you are hurt, it doesn't give you the right to hurt others. I'm sure you've heard that before. When you have a working relationship with your guides, they steer you in an intelligent direction that's not aimed at hurting anyone else. My mother was obviously not connected to her guides. She felt alone and angry and made bad choices as a result. This is not possible when you have a connection to your guides and you act on their valued guidance. Knowing that we were going to be meeting all the relatives that Mom had been telling me were dead for 54 years since I was born, I decided to take something the relatives could connect with. I put together a chronological photo book of Mom's life. It turned out to be the key component to communicate what words could not. Seeing would be believing. We met Uncle Bob and his wife in Erie at the end of September. I could sense his lightning fast mind instantly calculating everything from the moment I opened the hotel door and met him for the first time. Uncle Bob looked nothing like how my mom had described him when we were kids. My mom said her dead brother, Bobby, was tall, slender, and had dark hair. That would have described my older brother, Randy. Uncle Bob was short, stocky, with light hair. Couldn't have been more opposite. You're going to find out as I finish this book just exactly why she did that. The first thing he saw when he looked at me was that I did indeed have the family resemblance. He also saw why my mom did not like me, which I wouldn't understand until later on in this visit. Most of all, he was happy to meet me and ready to take Ray and me on an eye-opening adventure into Mom's secret past, starting the next morning. Just before he left the hotel room, Uncle Bob stopped and warned us about Cindy. He said the reason my mom wouldn't see Cindy is because she conned her out of $46,500 by claiming that she had cancer. He told us not to believe a word out of her mouth. We thought about the call Cindy had made to us a month before, telling us that Mom had terminal cancer and that they had a falling out. We now realized that when Cindy wasn't able to con us out of the money just a year earlier, she went to her grandmother and conned her. The next morning, Uncle Bob and his wife picked us up for a day of show and tell. They drove us around in their big van while he told me the details of my mom's life. For the first time ever, someone was telling me the truth about it, free of drama and exaggerations. He told me that when he met my mom in California, he demanded that she tell him the truth. He said she cried, but he got the whole story as he questioned her about everything she had left undone 59 years earlier. The last time Uncle Bob saw Mom was in 1946. Shortly after, he was discharged from the service. He had visited her in New York City, and she was dressed to the nines and had lots of money. She took him out on the town to the best places, and he couldn't figure out how she got all of that money. He surmised that she was prostituting for it, although he didn't ask her at the time. This time, he finally asked her about it, and she confessed. My mom said that their dad's sister, Aunt Agnes, had made her a ward of the state of Pennsylvania and sent her to the school for wayward girls. Uncle Bob corrected her by telling her that it wasn't her Aunt Agnes who sent her away. It was her father. He said my mom was in shock when she heard that. She was in total disbelief, but she knew her brother was telling her the truth. Then she confessed that when she was 13 years old, she started working as a prostitute on the boardwalk in Atlantic City. It was 6 months after the war ended, and the boardwalk was crawling with discharged veterans looking for a good time. She told Uncle Bob it was the easiest way to make money, and at that time, she made lots of it quickly. When he asked her why she disappeared, Mom told him she had gotten pregnant by one of her Johns. In June of 1948, she was 6 months pregnant when she met my dad on the boardwalk. He was 13 years older than she was. They decided to run away together, which they did 2 weeks later. My dad was still married to Anne. When Uncle Bob asked her if she ever got married, my mom said no. It's no wonder Ray and I couldn't find their marriage license. She said they had a common law marriage and that dad had never gotten divorced from Anne. That was why my mom and dad never answered when I asked them when their wedding anniversary was. Now it made sense that my mom had come up with the month of June for their anniversary because that's when they first met on the boardwalk. My dad, a married man, ran off with the desperate 15-year-old pregnant prostitute just 2 weeks after they met. 3 months later, Mom gave birth to her firstborn, my half-brother, Randy. In her attempt to cover that up, in those days, that was a colossal sin. So she named her baby Randy after my dad. My mom and dad were on the run. Like James Dean, they were living the fantasy of the time. Dream as if you'll live forever. Live as if you'll die today. That's what it took for my mom and dad. Boy. That's what it took for my mom and dad to overcome their past. They were both wild rebels running from a past that would become the lifelong secret they mutually agreed to guard and take to their graves. For both of them, that was a better alternative than staying in a place around people they didn't like. Uncle Bob told me that my mom was always just like their dad, mean and cruel. Also, what he didn't know was that my mom, like her dad, didn't want kids. When their mother got sick and was put into the hospital at age 33, the kids were handed off to relatives. Their dad was a raging drunk who could not take care of them. He said that he was a rotten person even when their mother was healthy. Their mother died at age 36 from tuberculosis when my mom was 13 years old. My grandfather's sister, Aunt Agnes, reluctantly took in my mom and Uncle Bob, but my mom and she did not get along. It got so bad that they got into an argument and my mother threw Aunt Agnes down a full flight of stairs. That's when my grandfather gave up his parental rights, and Mom was sent to live in a girls' home as a ward of the state of Pennsylvania. Learning this, I began to connect the dots in my own life. Finally, someone who knew her was telling the truth about my mom. The fog was lifting. I was seeing how this all played into the awful things that my mom had done to me. Although it was disturbing, I was relieved to finally put the pieces together. I had always known something was wrong with my mother because of the lifetime of torment she put me through. She appeared to be replaying her own unresolved life out on me, and even Cindy, if I allowed it, which I did not. Her attempts to get my dad to give me up were just mirroring her own experience in her life. Her attempts to get me to give up Cindy was the same cause. Uncle Bob took us to the neighborhood where he and Mom had grown up. We saw the old family farmhouse, the bar, now rebuilt, that their dad used to patronize before he burned it down with a careless cigarette. They found him dead on the street right outside the bar in 1976. Uncle Bob told all that to my mom when he saw her. I happened to mention that my mom used to say she didn't have a jealous bone in her body. Uncle Bob laughed and said she was one of the most jealous people he had ever known. He said she was jealous of me. With my mom jealous of me, and that he had seen that from the first time he met me when he visited Mom in California. In other words, when he came to the hotel room where Ray and I were after he visited my mom, and he opened the door and he looked at me, he instantly connected with something. And this is when he told me about it, that my mom was basically always jealous of me and wanted my life, you know? Uncle Bob took us to a place on Lake Erie where the family used to picnic when they were kids. He took us to the cemetery to visit the family graves and explained who everyone was. After traveling around for a while, we went to lunch at my great Aunt Josie's house. Uncle Bob said that was exactly what he and Mom used to do as kids. After they would come home from school, they would go to Aunt Josie's house to get fed. Aunt Josie was known for feeding people, and she continued that trend throughout her life. And she grew most of her vegetables and food in her garden. You could drop by any time at Aunt Josie's house and she would feed you. Everyone talked about the loss of Josie's husband because everyone loved and missed him. Aunt Josie was in her 90s and sunbaked from working in her garden. Her only health challenge was arthritis. Uncle Bob had arranged a family dinner that evening with the relatives who could make it. There must have been 30 of them attending. We met at an Italian restaurant, the only restaurant in town that had enough room for everyone. I brought the photo book of Mom's life with me so each person would be able to connect their missing pieces. Uncle Bob did not prepare us for the family other than to say they were simple and not highly educated, but they were very nice people. That turned out to be a very accurate description. Ray and I walked into the room, and everyone looked at us like we had stepped off a spaceship. Then they all looked down except for Aunt Josie, who we had met earlier that day, and Shelley and Rob, the relatives I originally contacted. Uncle Bob stood at the end of the table and introduced Ray and me. He announced the theme for the evening. It was the evening of truth. He added that there would be a phone call to my mom so everyone could talk to her. A grand healing was in motion. After greeting Shelley and Rob, I took the photo book of my mom's life to each person around the long table and explained what had happened to Mom from the start to the finish during her life. This gave every person an intimate connection with me and a reconnection to Mom's life. They loved it, and many of them cried and told me how sad they were about Mom's early struggles. Mom's sister was very sentimental. It took a few hours to get to everyone around the table, but it was important. I could identify the relatives that Mom would have despised. And I could also see the ones Mom liked. It was about 24 likes to 6 despises. I would say that they mostly liked how my mom's life worked out. Then Uncle Bob got Mom on the speakerphone, and those who had something to say talked to her. So, Ray, how many times are you going to blow your nose, huh? Ray cries through these whole things. Okay, they were all very nice to her. The connection was weak from Mom's end because she was having trouble breathing, and it made it hard for her to focus. At least the relatives now knew she was alive, though very sick. I could sense from my mom's voice that she didn't want to talk to these people. The relatives may have been healing some of those hurts, but my mom was not one of them. She remained closed off, even though Uncle Bob had flown out to visit her, and they cried and laughed together. I could tell from my mom's voice that she had turned to her cold, closed-off ways. Because these people were her roots, I knew they understood that energy. To neutralize the intensity, Ray was fun and funny. He was able to break the tension time after time because he was not part of that heavy family energy. I was glad that he was there. The only relative who didn't come to the family dinner was my mother's Aunt Agnes, the one she had attempted to kill by throwing her down the stairs. She was the one relative my mother hated the most. The next morning, Ray and I met Aunt Agnes at her upscale assisted living community home. Uncle Bob told her what was going on and that we were coming to visit. But he forewarned us that Aunt Agnes still didn't believe that Mom was alive. Aunt Agnes was in her 90s, well cared for, very proper, and had 100% of her mental faculties. When she saw me, she looked up and then looked down, keeping her composure. This reserve was similar to the response we had gotten when we met the relatives the night before. I could tell she still had doubts that I was really Mom's daughter. Her demeanor was almost defiant, but as I showed her the progression of Mom's life in the photo book, she could no longer deny the truth. Aunt Agnes also recognized that I was not like her Pennsylvania relatives. That came as the biggest shock to her. Aunt Agnes was sort of prudish, but when she relaxed and let go, she started apologizing for not having done a better job with Mom. We learned that she had been overwhelmed with responsibilities. After all, she had 2 kids of her own, running a farm, teaching school full-time, and had a husband to take care of. She said she felt bad that she couldn't give my mom more attention than she did. I saw that her regret was genuine. The truth is, Aunt Agnes understandably resented her brother for dumping his kids onto her. Besides meeting my Uncle Bob, meeting her was what I needed to put my mom's young life into perspective. This was the one relative my mom talked about the most with so much hate and anger. I never told Aunt Agnes how Mom felt about her, but I think she knew. Aunt Agnes died the following year. Uncle Bob did a spectacular job taking us around and telling me the truth about Mom's life. He was instrumental in the family healing. It was Mom's intention to leave the wounds wide open, never to be heard from again. Throughout her life, she always bragged that she would take her secrets to her grave, but that never happened. None of this would have happened without Hurricane Rita that threatened my Uncle Charlie, which brought about the visit that started the unraveling of the family secrets. Lesson. Boy. From the time I was a baby, my guides helped me rise above my mother's rage, discovering the hidden whys and final unraveling of all the family secrets lifted this layer of fog from my life. What's interesting is that I wasn't allowed to know about any of this until that point in time. I was in my mid-50s by the time this was revealed to me. Accumulating a lifetime of tips, learnings, lessons, and awarenesses from my guides was what kept me on my path, but also in the dark. They are masters at presenting you with events at precisely the right time so you can learn what you came here to achieve, overcome, and understand. Most everything my guides have helped me learn is in this book. Okay. Okay, so next week, next Saturday at 1 p.m., next Saturday, November 21st at 1 p.m. Pacific time, I will read to you from chapter 26 of Guided. 27. Stand corrected, Ray. Thank you. Chapter 27. It's one more chapter after 27 and Guided. I'll be done reading Guided. But we have some cool things after that, okay? Okay, chapter 27 of Guided. Clarity brings one epiphany after another. After the trip, I was flooded with one epiphany after another. If I were to sum up my mother's life, it would be that her anger and resentments caused her to miss out on much of what was available to her in her life. As a child, she was confined in a religious cloister of simple-minded people who thrived on their judgments. My mom hated it there. I don't blame her. Her problem was that even though she left, she took it all personally, and that's what ruined her life. That's one of the first things my guide helped me understand, to never take any of this personally. Now, I can see from my mother's choices what it can do to a person when they don't know this. Until then, you have help. You are never alone and always being guided.